How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
They say that imitation is the highest form of flattery, and if that's the case, the latest numbered entry in the Resident Evil series is a worn, rusted printing press. On paper, Village, as it's now known, appeared to be a complete departure, from rumours circulating that it would return to a more rustic setting, similar to a certain seminal entry of the series, to incorporating traditional ghouls like werewolves and vampires, the latter being supersized much to the kink of the internet. And you know what? I completely get it. This series has gone everywhere in the last 25 years, and has been rebooted more times than I've had Jill sandwiches. So perhaps this Hammer-style trek where we shoot a sexy version of Dracula in the face is just the tonic to keep this series alive, or slowly perish as a result of the proverbial stiletto of stagnation stepping on its throat. But as a miserable pile of secrets and an enjoyer of Resident Evil, I kept my personal hype for this interesting fresh take to a scientific bare minimum. Because, well, let's be real here, hype is cancer, and the people who subscribe to that shit are twats. And personally, I feel like this series has gotten stale from a gameplay standpoint. Alright, spending a ton of time reviewing a fair chunk of the RE games over the years on this YouTube channel doesn't help this burnout, and even the resurgence of the recent back-to-back remakes of 2 and 3 and the brilliantly paced thrills of 7, my hype for Village was very low. Yet still, I had hopes for the 28th release game of this franchise. So does Village hold up to the lofty standards of its previous entries, or did we get a stiffy over voluptuous vampires, and forget that the game was a load of recycled tripe on a tricycle? Judging by the snark, what do you fucking think? We start this adventure with a Tim Burton style animated short film, which is cute if a little heavy handed. Am I criticising the tact of a Resident Evil game? Yes, because I like kicking amputees in the imaginary shins. Anyway, we cut to our former chainsaw wielding wife, Mia Winters, reading a spooky tale to her infant daughter Rose, while returning protagonist Ethan complains that reading this fable is destroying her childhood. And by looking at her, the only thing I think she needs is a software update. After bitching like a pearl-clutching Karen, Ethan takes his DNA dump to bed. And then we cut to our lovely couple complaining about Mia's previous chainsaw carving career, which is rudely interrupted when she catches a scrapyard of lead to the tits. Mia! Oh no! Our true love! No! And other associated noises of loss and grief. And oh look kids, is returning roid rager Chris Redfield, looking like a muscle-bound sex toy in a tumble dryer. After interrupting this wonderful dinner party of tea and steroids, Chris steals our cum sprout for reasons that are so dumb it puts the series to shame. But before we get to react to this shit, Ethan gets an American sleeping pill, and then wakes up in the middle of nowhere after the car carrying his family crashes. So frozen alone, our favourite twat stumbles through the tundra and comes across this ominous village that appears to be having a never-ending party, with more bodily fluids than a hotel bedsheet. Then we come across this kind old man who is annoyed with the fellow partygoers for messing up his lawn or whatever. And yes, one cock-up leads to another, and Ethan gets dragged into the basement, which is filled with dead yokels. In this bleakness, we see a silhouette of a creature, which of course leads to a jump scare, where our hero gets half his hand bitten off. So as a witty retort, we introduce our new dinner date to Dr. Makarov. After fingering Freddy, Ethan makes his way into the hornet's nest and finds a new friend. Nice. He then buckshots a few more happy campers before being jumped by Lion-O from Thundercats. And before he shows Ethan his sick bass guitar, the church bell of time contrivance rings, and all the griefers leap towards the bingo hall, which is a great pivot point, because I can't be asked to talk about this bloody intro anymore. As a personal challenge, I wanted to talk about this game differently than the rest of the coverage I've seen on YouTube. While it is the main influence of the subject at hand, and the gameplay foundation of the entire piece, I really don't want to talk about Resident Evil 4. And to save your brain spaces, I'm not going to recap what Resident Evil 4 is, because if you are watching this, chances are you already know, and I want to bank it for another time. Why? Well, we have another version of it coming soon that is completely necessary and doesn't make me want to spit on the floor.
Sometimes that is better.
But this begs the question, why Village and the people who created it seem to have this throbbing creative spurt to evoke this game, given that the previous title, Resident Evil 7, was supposed to be a hard reboot to this fucking franchise, with a new setting, themes and characters. Hell, they even changed Chris from his usual gassed up tosser look to a guy who acts straight in the public chat but calls you daddy in the DMs. Also, why are we getting frothy over Resident Evil 4 when the entire video game industry is still using elements of that game to this very day? Especially after the mainline numbered series of games suffered such a severe critical slump. I mean, where do you go after blowing up an undead T-Rex? Remake Dino Crisis? The reason why I'm harping on this is that Resident Evil 7 felt unique. Instead of fully leaning into the action to make the player feel anything, it attempted to legitimately scare the player by forcing them to face their fears in a tight claustrophobic area, which felt palpable and realistic, if you can ignore the monsters made of shit, of course. Yes, it was a magical realism where all this crazy bullshit happened, but it felt more than just shooting a bloke with tentacle porn for a face. And I'm not saying that Leon's big dumb day trip is bad. Far from it. But if you've played a third-person game since, chances are you have played Resident Evil 4 by proxy. However, if you're going to steal ideas for a game, it might as well be Resident Evil 4. And yes, I've been complaining about it. Deep down, I'm not opposed to it. Especially since Village has already framed itself as a throwback to not only itself, but horror media in general. I mean, just look at it. Look at the scenery. If you gave our hero a loincloth and a whip, this could have been called Castlevania. So while Village has a Leon flavour to it, it isn't entirely based on its murder boner. And furthermore, being compared to that classic causes Village problems. So let us dive off this springboard into the frozen lake of shite and really talk about the turds. While this following section will be the most subjective, as I don't really have any hard evidence to really prove what I'm talking about, I cannot shake this feeling that the design behind Village is an intentional buffet plate, filled with various and clashing tastes and textures, because the creators had no sense of finesse or confidence in the average gamer's attention span. And yes, I use a food analogy in a video game review, go fuck yourself. In less words, it feels focus grouped. And just the thought of sitting a certain demographic down to beam some tat on the screen to get their base and shallow opinions on it takes art and shaves it down to the most objective, acceptable mush for the masses. And from a philosophical standpoint, if you count a sweary video on the internet as such, this brings my piss to a boil. Sure, focus groups are nothing new, but as a long-running franchise with an already engaged audience, is this really necessary? Do we need to hit every popular horror gaming trope in a single game to capture this wide imaginary audience? No. And the biggest example of this conflicted feeling is the now infamous Benevito Mansion. Once again, it's a lovely setting, and I'd happily dry hump every piece of furniture until my knob resembles a tan-coloured three-piece suite. But this is just the window dressing to the crushing disappointment I felt during my first playthrough of Village, and the utter contempt in the future ones. Okay, it's spicy takes time. I hate what the playable teaser to Silent Hills did to gaming. While I appreciate it as its own standalone artistic endeavour, there is no denying the void it left behind after its untimely death. And this void was sadly filled with games that took the inspiration of PT, but didn't get what PT was trying to do. So we were blasted with endless interpretations in a relentless series of releases from high and low budgets, and most were fucking trash. Sure, I may have enjoyed some of these derivatives, especially if they contain spooky vegetables or have a certain vibe, but in the end, these are still derivatives that took the surface level design of PT, yet missed the mechanics that made that example unique, and more critically, what made it scary, with most only getting that something flashing in front of your eyes can cause panic. Which is fine if you're engaging with a game at that level, or screaming for the entertainment of chuds online, But that punchline isn't scary to me, it's fucking annoying. Oh, what is this? It's now time for its biggest rival to do this shit? Okay, Village, what have you got? Are you kidding me? This thing? Really? A mix between Kevin McAllister and my morning dookie? Now, while this sequence where you have to duck from a terrifying rug rat is indeed anxiety inducing, the way this moment is set up is contrived as hell. Okay, the first thing I liked about this level was the arrival to the mansion. It sets the mood and dials up the intrigue with its uncanny floor design, especially when you take the elevator down to the PT corridor. Then you enter the main room and spot a mannequin of Mia laying on the table. Suddenly the lights go out and poof, all your weapons are gone. Okay, I can see why they did this because shooting a baby is kind of dark, even when it looks like a penis covered in shit, but the real reason why your shooters are snatched is to arbitrarily depower the protagonist, in possibly the laziest example I've seen in a while. Which is fine if the main loop was plodding around like a scared twit. The rub is, this is Resident Evil, where we have been conditioned to shoot the fleshy ballsack first and ask its views on social issues later, preferably when it's bubbling on the bathroom floor. And while I'm not against this change of pace, it feels out of place due to how drastic and sudden this change is, and where it happens. The opening to Village is this bombastic wolf shooting hoedown, in which you demonstrate the true power of birdshot to the cosplay room at a furry convention. Then this rollercoaster forces us to play hide and seek with Lady D and her 3 daughters. And yes, that is a masturbation joke. And then bam, we are shoved into this poor man's version of PT that is so contrived I can see the code that constructed it. And the preceding boss fight, if you want to call it a boss fight, in which we must grab this goth Barbie from the crowd of other goth Barbies and stab it in the face a few times, adds to this complete brick wall of shittiness. But on paper this should work because the last thing horror should be in any medium is comfortable. But this sequence placed here after the strongest part of the entire game feels weird and out of place. And yeah, I'll admit, when I first saw this thing chasing you around, it is quite intimidating. But to halt the flow of the entire game just to show you this very quick sequence that in repeat playthroughs would just be a pain in the fucking ass to get through isn't the way, in my opinion. Especially when it leads into the structure of Resident Evil Village. While I've highlighted Creepy Cindy and the Fappening the Masquerade, these are 2 sequences out of this entire world, where a bad lad from this cult of Bellend resides, with each containing a pickle jar that we need for reasons we'll touch on later. Let's just say you won't find any Branson in these containers, not even a small chunk version.
No, Ethan. That's heresy.
What you will find is a gaggle of chunky vegetables, which are the bosses of this world, such as our giant waifu, this thing, that thing, and Magneto, who speaks in fluent camp.
Well, well. Didn't think anyone was left. You must be pretty tough. Huh.
As well as the biggest fish named Mother Miranda, who is, in my humbled opinion, the worst Resident Evil antagonist of all of them. Yes, even Big Tits McGee from Resident Evil 5 ranks higher than her. And when all you have in a mediocrity contest is the size of your breasts, you know you fucked up.
Oh, I have my eyes set on something much bigger.
Oh, hi, Mark.
You may have picked up my mocking tone here, and that I don't care about most of these antagonists. And yes, well done Jerry, have a Pringle. They all kinda suck. Some by design, others by chance, and others are ruined by the comedy black hole known as memes. Such as our boo, Lady Diarrhea, Dinner Plate, sorry I don't speak Welsh, which hurts because this section is placed after the intro fucking bangs. The environment, this massive castle where you're equally scared and horny, looks amazing. However, the problem with this section, it's so bloody short, and it relies on that fucking overused gameplay trope of a big bastard endlessly chasing the hero down, which Resident Evil has used in about 3 games in the last 3 years. Alright, sure, it's a lot of fun, but pipe down now. What I'm trying to say, with Village especially, to have this hench hussy and her vampy daughters chasing our hero like the last broody singleton at a school reunion is disappointing, because we're forced to run away from this antagonist when we have this really cool environment to explore, but we have no time because we gotta run. And that pisses me off a little bit, because what is Resident Evil when you're not turning things into bloody chunks? You are exploring the environment. And once again, I felt this sinking disappointment. Not the thought of being stepped on by Mother, but really, are we doing this again? Can I just check this place out that looks fucking cool without Auntie Tittenhausen trying to bite my knob off? But the real kick in the nuts is that this entire sequence, the best part of this entire game, lasts an hour. And then, oh boy. We meet this distended bollock in a onesie, which leads to a fishy fuckabout where we must raise a dam to fight him. And I partially take back what I said about Layers of Fear 2, because this is the new king of boring the absolute fuck out of me, with a boss fight which is so bad I'm just shocked it's even in here. Which sends us to Magneto's machine shop, where he tempts us to join him to take over this clan or whatever, I don't care. Which of course Ethan rejects, and ends up like a rat in a maze dodging T-850s that play like the dumber versions of the Reanimators. Yes, you don't need a night vision scope to see the weak spots, it's right there in its chest. Whoopee fucking do. And then of course we bump into Chris and... oh, we'll get to him later. Which leads to a mech fight with Captain Cringe. Aha, he said it, get it? Yeah, Chris likes punching boulders. And with that zinger, there is my other problem with Resident Evil Village. The writing sucks. Yes, I know I'm about to critique a facet of this franchise that revels in its pulpiness. I mean, Jill sandwiches and mech fights for fuck's sake. The most memorable moments in this series were not created by chance. And we are going to talk about it because Village has problems. And I want to preface this that yes, I know Resident Evil is and will always will be dumb. And that is perfectly fine with me. While it may walk that line in tone, there was always a campy charm that always made me feel that the creators behind this series were in on this joke. And Resident Evil as a whole has always had a healthy mix of horror and comedy, which made me as a shithead scaredy cat teenager get into this series. I think of Kendo in Resident Evil 2 when he gets jumped by a group of vegans and brutally chomped to death. And yes, as a teenager that was quite shocking, yet the absurdity of that moment is also pretty fucking funny. And the problem with RE8's approach to this type of schlock is that it's taking elements of that charming cheese, but doesn't seem to get what made that shit charming in the first place. So you get characters such as Heisenberg, yes, that is his real name, who speaks like he just stepped off the set of Resident Evil 4, but the writing that's being put into his mouth feels uncanny and weirdly dull.
Do you have any idea how powerful that kid is? Even Miranda scared her. Last time, you freak! I swear to God!
And no bones to the actor playing him or the performances in this game, but it doesn't have that same I don't know what the fuck I'm doing energy to it. And sure, you don't have to fully lean into the old way of doing things, and I think the remakes of 2 and 3 balance this out perfectly, but there needs to be this sense of conviction when you deliver this kind of performance. Especially now that voice actors are used to market these games. Unlike in the past when Jerry Gobblecock from HR recited poorly translated Bon mots into a Fisher-Price microphone. It just feels like the people behind Village and the script seem to be embarrassed to go all in, especially when it's supposed to be a send-up of one of the most schlocky, ridiculous, stupid, campy games I've ever played. Another example of this oddness is how our boy Ethan is portrayed. Like a flip-flop stuck to Usain Bolt's balls, fuck off, I have writer's block, Ethan is supposed to be your standard cool action hero, with his one-liners about bingo and midget despots. But somehow, instead of saying something like that, he says some of the most off-kilter shit imaginable, which doesn't match the vibe of the moment at all, such as the part where Ethan finds this woman and her father, who has been wounded by the local furries. So our hero helps them find sanctuary at a nearby YMCA. And of course the locals are not friendly, but reluctantly they let them in. Oh, and I love this guy.
There is no one left! A worthless invalid, a stupid, wailing bitch! And you drag a bloody man and an outsider in here like it's nothing? And expect to be all safe? There is no safe!
Yes, rub that James Corden all over me. Sadly, this smug prick moment is interrupted by our new stepdad turning feral, so our boy and his new squeeze have to escape this evil residence. And I need to highlight here that this entire sequence is about 5 minutes long. And now I'm gonna shut up so you can watch this shit.
There, that's our way out.
Thank God. But what then? The village is still full of monsters. We can't fight them, there's too many.
Hey, don't talk like that. We'll find a safe house to put you in until I can find my daughter. My hunch is she's in that old castle.
No, that place is full of nothing but blood and death. And I don't want to be alone while you're... Father?
Elena, no. That's not him. Not anymore.
He said my name! Father!
Wait, it's not safe! Stay there! Come on, give me your hand!
Ethan, go! Save your daughter!
Elena, don't give up! Reach for me! God damn it! Why is everyone dying on me?
Did you see the awkwardness here? Let me explain. Ethan's new flame is treated like she's going to be this reoccurring character, a person that he can rely on throughout this story, and be a pseudo love interest, because she does kind of look like Mia, but yeah, you get it. But then she dies. And it's supposed to be this big emotional moment with some bint we don't even know. And because this is such a total mishmash, I'm not sure if this is a joke or a pathetic attempt to make us feel sorry for this tit. It just comes off as awkward. I mean, who wrote this shit? David Cage? Oh, oh, thanks guys. No, you're too kind. Thank you. Oh. Which is a perfect segue to talk about our protagonist. Ethan as a character has this Ben Affleck level of anti-charisma, with this awkward energy flowing through him, which is oddly fascinating, and in a weird way I kind of love him because he is the exact opposite of the character we normally get in these types of bombastic action games. And yes, he was silent by design because that game was in VR, but for this type of action-based silliness, he definitely needed some spice. But the irony is, giving him a personality has made his character worse, arguably in the best way. You see, while playing Village, I've recently got into Nathan Fielder, thanks to Super Eye Patch Wolf's video on him. Yes, I'm a slut for handsome Irish dudes, blow me. But this video sent me on a side binge in which I began consuming everything Nathan Fielder, particularly his shows Nathan For You and The Rehearsal. And I just love his painful awkwardness and his innate ability to say the wrong thing at the right time, often to hilarious effect.
You know I'm not your real dad, right?
Wait, what?
However, while playing Village, these two characters shared a lot of the same personality traits, Ethan is awkward, and his one-liners rarely, if ever, land with any conviction, to the point where I feel the writer's lips curl who had to fucking write this shit.
You're the one who's cursed.
And then you have to factor in this weird creative decision to never, ever show his face, which isn't a big deal when you play the game in first-person mode, but it does lead to this uncanny disconnect later on, especially in the recently added third-person mode, which in my opinion should have been here on day one. But you know modern gaming, we have to pay the privilege to play the fucker as intended. So yeah, in my headcanon, Ethan is Nathan. You're welcome. But now we must pick up with Ethan and see what he's up to. Let's talk about the twists. You may have noticed earlier I pinned a few bits to talk about later on in this video. And the reason why I wanted to talk about them here is because in isolation, these plot points are fine. But when you put them in context of the overall story, this hilarious inconsistency emerges. Just like the bulging veins of our long-running juice head. To rip the mask off this dumb plot like a Scooby-Doo villain, the woman you see here at the very start of the game, who looks and sounds like Mia, isn't Mia. This is the cult leader Mother Miranda, which I mentioned earlier, who can apparently shapeshift into any life form, because she is part of the mold. That genetic substance that looks like shit? Yeah, that absorbs the DNA and memories of everything it touches, and creates monsters that look like my morning sins after a chicken vindaloo. And the origins of this stuff is this delightful looking thing called the Megamycete, which acts like the core of this entire bioweapon, which in a nice narrative touch, the reason why we have werewolves and vampires and other gothic horror shit running around is because these are distortions of the fairy tales that the locals had in their noggins when they got assimilated. Going back to the intro of this fucking game, when our favourite jarhead shoots your supposed waifu, instead of telling Ethan that this woman is not his baby's mother, he just stands there with that shit-eating grin on his face in a dumb attempt to misdirect the player. Because you had plenty of time to say, hey mate, your missus is a nutter, and that's not your missus, mate. But instead he continues to act like a snooty bellend. And it's a plot point pulled out of so many asses, it feels like an explosion at a baby changing room. And that doesn't even factor the other narrative conundrums, such as why Mia and Ethan live within driving distance of this village, which is engaged in this world-ending bioweapon nonsense, as well as the black site where Chris and his spook friends reside. It just feels weird. Is this world the size of Stoke? And I know I'm picking holes in a Resident Evil game, a series where nuance does not exist. But this is a microcosm of how the narrative has been written and how the design surrounding this text undermines it. In an interview with the Crimson Head podcast, the lead writer of Village, Anthony Johnston, went into the process of how his team of writers and the developers approached the narrative design. This snippet is in regards to the Benevento mansion.
House Benevento was basically Sato-san's baby, if you'll pardon the pun. It was his vision. He guided this section of the game through its creation. So by the time I came on board and when we got in the original week-long writer's room where we kind of hammered out lore and plot and what have you for Village, some parts had already been not completely established, but certainly, you know, there was a vision for certain parts of the game, and this was one of them.
However, if you extend this creative mindset to the rest of Village, it does feel like all the parts of the game were made in isolation, then later strung together into a string of events that happen, with no real logical reason. It just flows from one thing to the other without much thought. I mean, when you're doing the main gameplay loop, you won't notice this emptiness because the gunplay is so satisfying. Especially when the sound design of some of these weapons make me harder than Carol Vorderman's Sudoku. But when the dust settles and you're going back into just walking around this desolate village, you can't help but feel that despite all its craziness, RE8 and its main narrative lacks agency. And yeah, I could easily open a browser and have all the lore and story beats I want from the many wikis on this game. But for me, if I have to look for the 4 W's that you didn't give me while consuming the primary story, you fucked up. Yes, the village itself is visually interesting, with some gameplay distractions that'll keep you chugging along at a relative quick pace. But making the sandwich first before you put the filling inside leads to an unsatisfying meal. Which leads to the main motivator of this story, Ethan saving his daughter. And I'm sure you've heard all this before. It's a tale as old as time, and has been overused in the last decade of games writing, where a hairy dad must save his daughter, because he must protect the innocent, blah blah fucking blah. Yes, some have risen to the top, such as The Last of Us, which let the relationship between our lead and his surrogate daughter simmer for a road trip to save humanity, and this slow burn helped us buy into Ellie and Joel's relationship. Even though I found the gameplay kind of dull, when it hits its groove in terms of story, it's a waterslide I've been down multiple times because that relationship is so much fun to experience. It feels believable and relatable.
Bakers trade bread recipes on a need-to-know basis. Need.
I get it.
A moon rock tastes better than an earthly rock because it's meatier. Oh man, that made me hungry. A backwards poet writes in verse.
Do you even get that?
Of course not.
And there is none of that in Village. Apart from the intro and the very end, we never interact with Rose in any meaningful way. But this, like it or not, is the main driving force for our lead character. So, question is, how does Village persuade the player to care about Rose, Ethan's pride and joy, the apple of his eye, and other tortured terms for his daughter he loves so very, very much? Well, you know those jars of sandwich spread you've been collecting? Those are parts of his now deceased daughter.
That flask seems to contain her head.
No. What?
Rose is...
Don't say another word!
Yeah, she has been dead for a while now. The thing is, all this is fine if this revelation was told to the player late in the game, because the shock value of, well, finding your daughter in these jars would be a great motivator for Ethan. So he can, you know, go get some revenge, cowboy style, or whatever the hell. And if it was told in the late game, it would mask the shock of this fucking stupidity of this edgy reveal. And I've said this in many videos before. Horror games can wave away a lot of moral scrutiny and explore taboo subjects if that subject holds any emotional weight, which this does not. But this reveal is told you within the first hour of the game, which, yes, is still shocking, but loses any luster because by the time we get to the end of the game, who cares? We didn't spend any time with this character, and when we did, she looked like this. There's a disconnect here, or I'm just an emotionless monster I don't know anymore. But the next lump of contrivance you have to swallow is why Mother Miranda went to this trouble in the first place to take Rose, and how it's told to the player. So yeah, going back onto the Megamycete, this shit testicle, if you will, was discovered by Miranda after her daughter died of the Spanish flu in 1918, and after tasting the sticky stuff from within the Fountain of Horror, she discovers her daughter's memories and DNA are in this thing. So, being a biochemist herself, she works night and day to find a way to reanimate her sprog by implanting the mold into other test subjects, aka the clown show we've been fighting throughout the entire game. And yeah, basically this is the Las Plagas parasite from Resident Evil 4, with fewer tentacles and more feces, obviously. And in a very interesting narrative tidbit, interesting being quotes of course, during this grotesque research, she had time to tutor a few up-and-coming bioweapon Melvins. One in particular is Oswald Spencer, the owner of Umbrella. And get this, the mold was the basis of the original T-virus, meaning that this fucking meatball caused the entire Resident Evil saga.
That is one big pile of shit.
You got that right. And I bet you're wondering where I got this spicy nugget of information. Well, let me introduce you to the exposition room, where the most important parts of the story take place, and where it's explained why the shape-shifting tart is our antagonist. This room, this fucking room, is laden with notes that tell you all of this, 5 minutes before the final showdown. And I've made jokes in the past about cannons and shotgun blaster stories, but this is a trebuchet. This is like writing in the margins because you've run out of paper and talent, so all you do is draw little dicks and vaginas to pad out the page. Oh yeah, and we also find the real Mia Winters, languishing in a prison cell all this time, after apparently having quite the terrible experiments done to her, off camera where we didn't see. So who the fuck cares? Alright, that's enough of this bollocks. Let's cut through all this shit and take down that big bad boss, shall we? After Lady Huge Ass and that fucking mech fight, Miranda must be using all the power of modern technology to make an engaging, epic conclusion, right? It's not going to be the usual disappointing tripe, because Resident Evil enjoys stretching out its final acts to the point of futility, is it?
I assure you I'll provide her with truth.
She's my goddamn daughter, you psycho!
Yep, it is. And thank God, I was starting to get worried. Sadly, we have to interrupt this oasis to talk about the story once again. I'm so tired. Now, throughout these two stories, you may have noticed that Ethan has a problem keeping his limbs in one place. And the reason why he doesn't die of shock or blood loss is because he is part of the mold as well. The thing is, this reveal is supposed to be his big character moment. However, it springs another problem. If Mia is infected with the mold in RE7, then Ethan was tainted with the same demonic turd, you would think that Rose, their flesh and mouldy blood, would share the same traits, right? And besides, if Miranda wanted to resurrect her daughter, couldn't she use some, I don't know, DNA manipulation or other mythical or sci-fi shenanigans to make Rose her own daughter through, I don't know, artificial insemination, rather than chop this poor child up? If you look at it from this angle, it just seems that antagonists like killing babies off screen because the writers threw their hands up in the air and gave up. Fine, here's your scientifically calculated bare minimum story to poke the player into playing these wonderfully crafted action set pieces. Here is your carrot covered in crap on a stick. Now shut up and enjoy. Are you happy now? No, Capcom. If you like killing infants so much, then why are you clumsily injecting it into every facet? Has your teenage Brazilian nanny asked for too much for child support? Where is she buried, Capcom? Sarcastic twaddle aside, I will reiterate that I am a petty bitch. And most importantly, Resident Evil has always been dumb schlock that revels in its wistful gore-filled glee. And I love it for that fact. The rub is, when it's compared to its wildly touted influence, Village stands at the urinal with a magnifying glass, while its contemporaries uncoil their engorged peckers, like an explosion in a sausage factory. And terrible penis analogies are great and all, but when you compare Village to 4 in terms of story, and the motivator to keep the game moving, apart from reintroducing the Spanish to gunpowder, Village looks like a cheap Chinese knockoff. And yeah, the gameplay will carry you through the story, with guns that make me squirm like a horny nerd with a copy of White Dwarf. But it's one of those games where if you stop and think about it for more than a second, the entire story collapses. That's why I feel Resident Evil Village is the midlife crisis of this franchise. It attempts to relive a time when it had a full head of hair and its penis worked, but a lot has changed since 2005. And now Resident Evil going back to the past makes it look like it's wearing a toupee made from Leon's Barnet and is dating a girl half its age in a lame attempt to feel younger than it really is. The reason why Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4 work on their own is because they go all in on their own creative directions. And attempting to combine the two with Village is the stupidest thing you could do, which is why it feels so uneven. And I think we need to wrap this shit up. In this cry for help massively disguised as a game review, my overall views on Resident Evil Village have been mixed. It's not good or bad, just another middle-of-the-road splatter of ideas that attempted to capture a specific time in its history and mostly succeeds with a mid-level proficiency. The irony here is that when it hits that faux Resident Evil 4 action and gameplay vibe, I was having a lot of fun. But that begs the question, if the best part of Resident Evil 8 Village is the shit it steals from Resident Evil 4, perhaps I should have just played Resident Evil 4. And this is where our subject melts from a creative standpoint. If you have the stones to invoke a title as influential as that one, you better do something that adds to this, in order to stand away from it and rise above it. Because if you don't, you are just jerking off with a branded t-shirt wrapped around your proverbial pecker. And I don't think Village is a bad game, but it is a shell of its former self, that lacks the charm and charisma which made me gravitate to this series in the first place. It lacks a reason to exist, other than to provide another distraction between the cradle and grave, to be remembered as a game that was perfectly fine, but lacking any edge. What I'm trying to say is, Village is the catch and rag of the series. A series built on contrivance and bombasticness, with some cool horror bits sprinkled in for good measure. A series not afraid to go completely insane just for the sake of going insane. And a series not afraid to try some stupid ideas, and have those stupid ideas become gameplay touchstones in their own right. And now, it stood there in its Jinko jeans, with a jailbait bint on its arm, trying to get into the youth club, while drunkenly screaming the lyrics of a song that no one remembers. And it's a little embarrassing, truth be told. So, drink your Ovaltine and go to bed. And stop soiling the carpet, you geriatric twat.